Welcome everybody. My name is Nolan Schillerstrom. I'm the Coastal Program Associate for Audubon, South Carolina. And with us here today is Jennifer Tyrell. Jen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am the Bird Friendly Communities Coordinator with Audubon, South Carolina. And Nolan and I have been working together for a long time doing all sorts of fun bird stuff. So I'm happy to be here to check out his latest version of his Shorebird training and talk to you guys via the chat.
So Jen will be monitoring the chat today. So if you are not familiar with Zoom or you've never done a webinar like this, the only things that y'all can probably see are me, maybe Jen, and the slides that we're sharing. But if you want to ask any questions, please do so. There's a little chat box in the bottom of your screen. Just click on that and type your question and send it to all panelists. And we'll be stopping throughout the presentation to answer those questions. But I'm happy to be here, and I'm so thankful for everybody that tuned in. We have over 150 people signed on right now, and that's really exciting to see. Any questions, please ask in the chat. And we're all in this together, and we all have a personal responsibility to do good for the shorebirds and seabirds on our beach. It's kind of a unique time right now, but a lot of the things that we talk about in this training can still be used if you're lucky enough to be on the beach, and will hopefully be used as you volunteer when things start to open back up. So let's get right into it. The training today, I'm hoping will only last like an hour and a half max, but if there are a whole lot of good questions, it may go beyond that. And I'm hoping that y'all stay tuned for as much as you can. So we will start with an introduction to Audubon, South Carolina, kind of why shorebird stewards, why did we start this program, then how to tell beach birds apart, and talk about some of our focus birds, some talking points on each species and what you'll see. Don't be scared about getting overwhelmed. It's okay, but we really try and boil this stuff down into something that's really digestible for y'all. Then we'll take a break and then get into the people side of this. So as shorebird stewards, which are volunteers that spend their time on the beach in between nesting sites and migratory flocks and the people that recreate on the beach and educate. So we want to talk about how to do that in a productive way, and then how to volunteer. And I'll apologize ahead of time if my dog starts barking or you see me moving around. It's probably because she's underneath me. She's napping right now, so I think we're all good. So what is Audubon, South Carolina? Our mission is to protect birds in the places they need right here in South Carolina. We are a part of the National Audubon Society. We're the state office, but I think this short video sums it up really nicely, what we are.
Birds are everyday miracles. They inspire us. Their songs uplift us. They teach us the rhythms of life on Earth. Our lives are intimately connected with the lives of birds. We've always known that where birds thrive, people prosper. As an Audubon member, you're part of a living legacy reaching back more than a century. In 1900, you launched the Christmas Bird Count, an annual citizen census that today attracts 70,000 volunteers. You helped ban the plume trade, which threatened countless species with extinction. In 1918, you helped pass the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the federal law to protect migrating birds. In the wake of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, you sounded the alarm about the dangers of DDT to birds and other wildlife. Your voice helped enact the landmark Endangered Species Act in 1973. You celebrated the return of the bald eagle, the brown pelican, the peregrine falcon, and other birds from the brink. Today, birds need us, and we need them more than ever. Habitat destruction, pollution, sprawl, and now Climate change pose unprecedented threats to birds and their homes. The plume trade was the great challenge for Audubon's founding generation. Protecting birds from the worst ravages of global warming is ours. Through your support, you continue this lineage of passion, commitment, and action for birds and their habitats. You are making a difference every day, and we are so grateful. Thank you.
So a really cool animated video that was done by National Audubon Society. And zoom into South Carolina, we care about birds in every aspect, but the three tenets that we do our work by is first is people. Engaging with people, engaging with volunteers, and connecting those people to birds and the habitat that is a lot of times, especially in South Carolina, right in our backyards. And then places like Crab Bank and other seabird sanctuaries in the island that are owned and managed by DNR, advocating for them and making sure that these places stick around for future generations. Centers and sanctuaries like Francis Bidler Forest and Silver Bluff. And then policies, whether it's large state scale solar policy or native plant policies or individual municipalities having better leash laws for their beach birds. It's all stuff that we work on and we care about. And I'd like to introduce an analogy that you may have heard before. It's from the researcher named Deborah Kramer. So Deborah Kramer focuses on a species called red knot. And I actually start a lot of my presentations like this. So these red knot that she studies start their journey in the winter in the very southern tip of Tierra del Fuego or Brazil, the very southern part of our hemisphere. And then this time of year, they're flying north about 9,000 to 10,000 miles to get to the Arctic to nest. So to make that journey and round trip, that's like 19,000 miles. They have to stop over in certain spots. And everywhere they stop over has to be healthy and undisturbed. So Deborah Kramer considers our Atlantic coastline to be a ladder. And for these birds to survive migration every single year, they have to climb that ladder up and down, and they want as many of those rungs in the ladder to be intact as possible. So zoom into just the United States, or North America. Our Atlantic Flyway has a pretty important piece to play. Places like South Carolina and New Jersey, all are significant rungs in that ladder. And it's our job to keep each of these states intact. Zoom into just South Carolina, you could think about every single one of our beaches as a rung in that ladder. And in South Carolina, that means 187 miles of coastline, almost 3,000 tidal shorelines, and 35 barrier islands. And that sounds like a lot, but the ones that are truly suitable for shorebirds still today are a very small fraction of that total number. And so that's where Shorebird Stewards come in. Shorebird Stewards is a program that Audubon started year-round back in 2016. And we followed some best practices that had been learned by other people in the state, as well as other Audubon state centers and chapters all throughout the US. So we started on Dewey's Island and Folly Beach, and then expanded in the last couple of years to 9 total sites. So after you have been trained today, or if you've been trained before previously, then you can volunteer at any of these sites. Now there are a few that only focus on residents and run their own program really well, like Kiowa Island and Seabrook Island. They have fantastic programs going on. And I say all this with kind of an asterisk, in that these programs normally go on without COVID-19, but they're all sort of on pause right now. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to do this training, to be ready to hit the ground running when the time comes. So we could not have gotten to where we are without a whole bunch of project partners. And I just want to highlight a few of these, there are too many names to mention. Everybody has had such an important role in the growth of this program, but kind of some of the founding members or people that have contributed so much to shorebird conservation in the state over the last few decades, even. Melissa Chaplin at Fish and Wildlife Service, and then at South Carolina DNR, Felicia Sanders, Mary Catherine Martin, and Janet Tebow. If you've ever worked with them, you know that they are absolute rock stars. They do so much every day for shorebirds in our state. So, but there's one big blank spot in this picture, and that's because the most important partner in all of this is you. So just by being here and listening to this, we have 169 people here today. You are the most important partner because your actions after you take this training will help countless shorebirds if you spread the word. I'll be introducing a lot of information today, but I want to urge you to keep it simple. There are a lot of resources that you can learn more after this, so don't worry if you can't remember it all. Keep it all in your head. And we have a couple publications that we do, like this trifold to the right, and a bookmark that we share with anybody that wants one at the very bottom. But if you just get onto Google and type in SCDNR coastal birds, it'll bring you to an absolutely stellar website that I actually check at least annually, probably more like a dozen times a year, because they update all of the information on the site with new research, with a lot of resources to go learn more. So in addition to Audubon's website, definitely check out this one. It's something I use all the time. So afterwards, sign up for a volunteer shift, and please share this knowledge with your friends, with your family, with your quarantine buddy, your roommates, whoever it might be, and we'll start to create a safer place for a lot of our shorebirds. So why do we care about shorebirds at all, or seabirds, and coastal birds? You could lump them all together. Coastal birds are declining. In the last, this was a report done by the American Bird Conservancy, and they publish a report called The State of the Birds every year. And one of their more recent reports showed that in the last 40 years, we've seen a 70% decline in shorebirds in North America. So 70% over the last 40 years is a pretty alarming number. Think about that. 40 years ago, for every 100 birds there were, today there's only 30. It's pretty alarming. So migratory shorebirds are at risk now more than ever, like the red knot. Piping plover, which are wintering shorebirds, need our protection while they're here in the winter, and then also nesting sites are limited. This is a picture of a least-tern nesting colony. And normally their natural habitat would be on a beach, and whether it's a shell substrate or sandy substrate, they love being on the beach near the water where their food source is. But I want to ask you something. Does this look like a beach? And a lot of you may be saying no right now, and you'd be absolutely right. A lot of y'all probably recognize that this is a gravel rooftop. These birds have adapted very interestingly to nesting on gravel rooftops throughout the state because those beach sites that they're used to are just not available anymore. They're not safe, they're disturbed too much, and they have to move to these sites. And you might think, oh, well, problem solved. There are plenty of gravel rooftops in the state. If you've ever talked to Mary Catherine Martin at DNR, you'd get a whole history about this. And because she's the person that runs programs in the state to protect these birds that stay on the rooftops. But there are threats that come along with this that I'll just touch on really quickly. And that's, you can see there's nothing protecting these birds from falling off the edge, and chicks can't fly yet. So they might fall into the gutter or fall right off the rooftop. Food can sometimes be further away, and even rooftop sites are becoming more and more rare these days as they're paved over with just straight tar or asphalt, I don't know what you would call it. So by the end of the presentation today, you all should be able to identify every single one of these birds. Just kidding. We're just gonna focus on the important four. And this is a concept that our friends on Seabrook Island came up with. So there's this idea that if you focus on 1 or 2 species in a certain habitat, then you can protect a whole lot of other birds too. And that's exactly what we want to do here. So the first one is the red knot. These are migratory birds. Then the piping plover, I already mentioned, are wintering. Least tern are here in the summer to nest, as are Wilson's plover. They're here during nesting as well. And I'll go into a lot more detail on these 4 species, knowing that if we do good for these 4, we'll be doing good for a whole suite of other birds. So let's take a quick question break. Jen, are there any questions that I can answer coming in through the chat?
I don't think so. I've been answering a few of them. There was 1 or 2 I couldn't quite follow earlier in the chat, but I think we're good so far.
Okay. Cool, cool. Then we shall continue.
Great. Oh, just kidding.
Okay.
Jan asks, we are on Hilton Head. Any volunteer activity here?
Yeah, so in past years, we have had a Steward program in coordination with the Hilton Head Audubon chapter, who do great work. That was a great partnership, and it worked for 1 winter, but there was not enough interest at the time to continue the program. But we'd love to start one back up down there. I think the closest site that currently exists would be Harbor and Hunting Islands to Hilton Head. But yeah, we're always working with the chapter leaders there at Hilton Head to think of more programs. Are there any others?
Yeah, I'm getting a few more coming in.
Yeah.
Looks like some folks are talking about Huntington Beach State Park, and as far as I'm aware, there is a really good program there. And Mike Walker, the ranger there, is coordinating with you on that.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a few folks asking about being connected to their local programs. So I guess we'll do a follow-up email probably to this webinar so that everyone knows who to get in touch with for their local programs.
Yes, absolutely. And so at the moment, we can't, it's not safe to organize volunteer programs, especially those that, that interact with people like this. So when everything is safe to go out again, how we normally do this is we'll do the presentation and then we'll send out an email directly afterwards with links to sign up for volunteer shifts and some more information, additional resources. What Jen touched on there is absolutely right too. So those places like Kiowa, if you live on Kiowa, we'll get you in touch with the volunteer coordinator there, as well as Seabrook or Huntington Beach State Park. We partner on that program with Mike Walker and the state park there. I also noticed a couple people are clicking the raise hand button, and that's a great function. But if you have a question, please put it into the chat. Just click on that chat button and type in your question. If you we will be the only ones to see it if you select all panelists.
I have one more quick question from Pamela. She said she lives on Johns Island, or if they live in Johns Island or Mount Pleasant and not on a beach, could they still be stewards? Maybe Folly, she says. Absolutely,
yeah. And in fact, the stewards on Folly Beach at Lighthouse Inlet, a lot of those volunteers come from members of the broader communities. Some people from Somerville that are really awesome stewards, they come down and volunteer. So Johns Island, definitely. Please come and help on Folly Beach.
And then there's one more question from Roger about the Myrtle Beach area. I'm guessing the closest one is probably the Huntington Beach State Park. Are there any others in the Myrtle Beach area or the Grand Strand area?
Yeah, you'd be absolutely right. Huntington Beach is the closest one there. There is not a program on Myrtle Beach, unfortunately.
All right, I think we're good to move on to the next section.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for the good questions. All right, so like I said, there are a whole lot of shorebirds and with complicated, exotic sounding names, but we'll boil it down into something that is hopefully a little bit simpler and easier to understand. So first thing to do when you see a bird on the beach is try and figure out, is this a seabird or is this a shorebird? And there's two main ways that we delineate those. The first is how they nest. So seabirds nest in colonies, in big groups, and they enjoy safety and power in numbers. Oftentimes, like this black skimmer colony, you'll see them nesting just like a beak's distance away from each other. Seabirds are not super tolerant of people. Well, neither are shorebirds, but seabirds really tend to nest on completely offshore islands, islands that are untouched by people, and that's really what they need. Shorebirds, on the other hand, are solitary or cryptic nesters, and they nest alone in defended territory. That's a really fabulous looking Wilson's plover there on the screen, submitted to the Audubon Photography Awards a few years ago. But shorebirds nest alone, right? And then the other way that we tell them apart is by what they eat. So boil it down real simple. Seabirds get their food from the sea, and shorebirds get their food from the shore, right? Seabirds are eating small fish, and shorebirds are going after crabs, insects, clams sometimes. That's a Wilson's plover and a royal tern on the screen there. And then another way that you might tell these birds apart, and this is kind of how I think about them a lot, is are they migratory? Are they only here during the spring and the fall, or do they stay here during the summer and nest? So, and these slides are actually adapted from Melissa Chaplin at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She was kind enough to let us use these really great graphics that you're about to see. So migration is where we'll start. Oftentimes this time of year, and we're kind of getting to the more of the tail end of migration as we get into April, but I'm sorry, May. But you'll see dunlin, dowitchers, semi-palmated sandpiper, all these crazy birds. And really what they're here to do is to eat and to rest. And that is completely dependent on where the tide is. So when they're here in South Carolina and it's low tide, they're foraging. That's when all the food is exposed. They're out trying to, whether they're using their bill like a sewing machine, trying to get stuff underneath the mud, or chasing around food like crabs. That's what they do at low tide. But at high tide, when all that food's covered up, they just have to rest and roost. And then again at low tide, foraging, high tide, roosting, it kind of follows that cycle. And what I find really, really interesting about these birds is that they might be feeding in the same general area, but their bills are adapted so that they don't really compete with each other too much for food. So you'll note, and a lot of these species that you see written out, we actually don't see in South Carolina, but these are very similar to the ones we do see. For example, instead of a sooty oyster catcher, we have the American oyster catcher. So you'll notice that the godwit on here has a much longer and straighter bill than that eastern curlew does to the total left. And each one of those bills is adapted to finding food at the exact depth that they're used to eating. Oyster catchers will mainly eat oysters, and we'll also go for like horseshoe crabs sometimes. And then you can see the plovers and the sanderling, which is a sandpiper, going after food that is a lot shallower or at the complete surface of the sand. So very interesting stuff, I think. And I love those graphics. And then on to nesting. And while we have a lot of birds that come through South Carolina to migrate, and a lot of those are heading up to the Arctic to nest, we only see them in the spring and in the fall. And those birds that we see in South Carolina are starred with a red star on this slide. Western sandpiper, black-bellied plover, red knot, sanderling, right? But there are a few that stay here to nest. And those three include the American oyster catcher, the Wilson's plover, and the willet. I'll talk a little bit more in depth about these in a little bit. But kind of the broader point here, and what's kind of cool to think about, is no matter what the month or the season is, we have shorebirds here in South Carolina. Whether it's spring or fall migration, you'll have, I love these cute little cartoon figures that Melissa pulled for these, but red knot and the semi-palmated plover, sandpipers and piping plovers come through in the spring and the fall, and some stay in the winter, but in the breeding season, there's your oyster catchers, Wilson's plovers, but we have shorebirds here all year long. There's never really a true shorebird season. And so back to our important four, we're gonna zoom in on each one of these species and tell you some stories that you can hopefully use if you decide to steward and be a volunteer, and also kind of let you know what you'll see if you go out to the beach. So here's another question break. Oh, I had a joke here. I'd be robbing you if I didn't stop for more questions. So do we have any questions in the chat, Jen?
We've had a few that I've been addressing as I see them if I could, and then one person asked about this going a little fast, and will this be available somewhere else afterwards? And I said yes, we're going to send out a link to the recorded version, so you can go back and pause Nolan and take notes if you'd like to. But
okay.
Aside from that, I think that's all we have for questions at the moment.
Okay, great.
All right.
So we shall continue. I'll try and slow down a little bit. I'm sorry that I'm going so fast. So the piping plover is where we'll start. And the piping plover, like I said, is here in the winter. But I say winter kind of with some quotation marks because really they're here for 9 months out of the year. But because they don't nest here and they're here through the winter, we kind of consider these wintering birds. So just to show you some really cute pictures of their nesting. And again, this is not what you'd see in South Carolina, but I'm trying to pull your heartstrings a little bit. So mom or dad with young ones. And then my absolute favorite picture that was submitted to the Audubon Photography Awards. Love that picture. So this bird is federally listed, and it gets kind of confusing with this bird because they nest in 3 main areas. You'll see on the northern part of this map in the Great Lakes, the US Great Plains, and the Canadian Prairie. Those are the 3 distinct populations that exist with piping plovers. And in the Prairie Canada and US Great Plains, these birds are federally threatened. But in the Great Lakes, they are federally endangered, and that's because there are only 71 breeding pairs left. So when we see them in the winter, you'll see the squares kind of indicate where these birds will overwinter. When they're here, that could be a bird that is from that endangered population of only 71 breeding pairs. So that really is, that's a little over 140 individuals left in that population. So it's so important to give these guys space when they're here in South Carolina too. And if you are able to see flags on these birds, our friends at DNR consider piping plover band resighting, kind of the varsity level band resighting, because everything is a complicated color scheme. But if you do have a spotting scope and you can look at this bird safely from a distance, if you see that orange flag on this one on the top, then that is a bird from the Great Lakes region that is part of that very small population. Some other really interesting talking points, I think. I'm not going to go through all of these because I think you can read them, but they are here for 9 months out of the year, and we are an important wintering site. So it's kind of a fun story to be able to say, hey, you see that little piping plover, if you can identify it, that bird is here to rest and refuel, and let's show them a little Southern hospitality while they're here because there aren't too many of them left. It could be a very rare and pretty beautiful thing to see one of them on our beaches in South Carolina. And their major threats while they're here are people, dogs, predators, development, weather, right? So it's some of those things, a lot of those things are things that we can prevent. And there are a lot of really cool stories from Old Man Plover. If you know that story, it was a bird that I can't remember how old it got, but it was somewhere between between 12 and 18 years. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly how old it was, but one of the longest lived piping plovers that we knew of. And we know that because it was banded as a chick. It was resighted in South Carolina, in fact, on Bulls Island, multiple years in a row, and went back to its nesting ground and kept producing chicks. So just kind of a cool story. And so the bigger point, and these say Charleston, but you could input anywhere in South Carolina, Hilton Head or Seabrook Island or Harbor Island or Huntington Beach State Park, right? So when these birds are mapping out their migration, okay, we'll fly along the coast and stop in South Carolina for a few days to rest before moving on. Why South Carolina? Well, there's a lot of seafood, beautiful beaches, and a rich history. Besides, last time we flew by there, I saw a sign for a great sunny place to rest. So our beaches really are so important for these birds, and they're here because they know that this is a safe place. At least it was at one point, and they will have some safe haven. But if you're actually out on the beach during the months that these birds are out here, I should mention they're not really here right now. It would be rarer finds to see a piping plover on the beach right now. But they'll be back after July. So they're really hard to see, and I'm going to highlight these pictures were from Ed Conrad as well. I forgot to cite that one at the bottom. But you might not notice them if you're just walking by and you're not really paying attention to the birds or any movement on the beach. Then, or you just don't know what you're looking for. It's very easy to walk through these birds or walk by and not even notice them until they fly. The goal, of course, is to not make them fly, because then they're expending energy that they would otherwise be using to eat and rest. But this is what you might see when you're out on the beach, when they're here. Little specks of light gray. Get your spotting scope or your binoculars out, and you might have a piping plover in front of you. I'll mention also that in the winter, they have different feathers than they do in the summer. So in the winter, that middle left picture is a wintering piping plover. And the top right is a pretty good example of a breeding plumage, kind of a cotton candy beak, orange legs, and a little black stripe along their forehead. Cool. So next is red knot. And red knot are one of my favorite birds to talk about. We could probably take a whole hour just talking about this species. But red knot, like I said earlier, fly 19,000 miles a year, give or take. And that's round trip. That is from Tierra del Fuego, the very southern tip of South America, to the Canadian Arctic, Arctic tundra. And they'll nest up in the north and overwinter down in the south, but we see them here during their spring migration, and then again a little bit in the fall. Their spring migration is going to be really from mid-March to mid-May. So you still have a chance to see them if you're ever out on the beach. Sometimes they'll travel in flocks of thousands, sometimes it's more like a few hundred. But these birds are declining and really need our help. They were federally listed. They're considered federally, I can't remember if it's endangered or threatened, but they are listed as of 2014 or 2015. So beautiful red hue is where these birds get their name. There is one individual that was, again, banded as a chick and has been resighted year after year after year, that is now somewhere to the tune of 18 years old. And if you do the math and figure out, okay, that bird has survived for 18 years, it's flown about 19,000 miles a year, you get the distance that adds up to is the same distance as it takes to get to the moon and halfway back. So this bird has a nickname called Moonbird. There's actually a book titled Moonbird that's really great. So in South Carolina, DNR and Fish and Wildlife Service have done some really interesting research with these birds as well, putting geolocators and nanotags on them. And those are just different devices to help track these birds. And if you want a lot of more detailed information, I would reach out to DNR or Fish and Wildlife Service to get that stuff. But Felicia Sanders runs this research in the state for the most part. So what they've learned though, and what we used to think, was that a lot of these birds stopped over in Delaware Bay as their final stop before going up to the Arctic. So a lot of really important attention has been given to that location, Delaware Bay. But through this research that DNR has done in South Carolina, we have now found out that some of our individuals fly straight to James Bay and then to their nesting grounds. And James Bay is that next stop that these birds were also making from Delaware Bay. So we have some of the largest concentrations in the hemisphere, and the largest concentrations that we know of in the Southeast. So at one time there were, I think the number was 8,000 birds in one place. Yeah, and I mean, it's absolutely fantastic that South Carolina is so important for these birds, but it just emphasizes how important it is for us to give them safe passage, right? So I'm gonna go to the next slide, because part of that research that they did showed one individual that I always kind of like to highlight because it's just kind of goofy, that decided to fly all the way over to Europe and then went up to the Arctic. And it's just like, what are you doing, dude? Why are you flying all the way over there? So these birds are declining. The population has declined again by 70% in the last 20 years. They have one of the longest migrations in the world. Oh, and here's that third point is, it wasn't 18, I guess 13 years, flew 242,000 miles, and that's where they get that term, the moon bird. There's really only a small number of places where these birds can stage or rest and eat. And they're mainly eating horseshoe crabs, which they're very closely tied to that species, and also Donax clams or coquina clams. I've seen them gorging on those as well. So they're here to eat and to rest. When they get here, they've flown thousands of miles, and it just emphasizes how desperate they must be to rest. Cool, and I mean, the rest of these you can read, but when they first arrived, that first picture on this slide is really indicative of what they would look like. They're really just gray. Somebody told me a couple months ago that, oh, that bird just kind of looks like a dirty seagull, and kind of hurt my heart a little bit. But I mean, it's true, they don't look very nice when they first arrive, but they'll slowly shed those feathers and regrow the next beautiful red set of feathers. And like I said, when they get here, I've logged 6,000 miles with another 4,000 to go. I'm famished. What's this? I thought this is all you can eat, and this little cute restaurant. And you better hurry it up, because that's about all you'll be able to eat, because there's somebody chasing them around. And unfortunately, we see this more often than not, people deciding to walk through the flock. It irks me when people have their phones up, taking video of themselves running through the flock. It always kind of hurts my heart a little bit, but that's why shorebird stewards are so important, is to prevent things like that from happening. Because every time somebody chases through a flock, it's like they're pulling the fire alarm in a food court. These birds would never get the chance to eat if they're being chased around all day. And this is kind of what you'll see on the beach. Big flocks of these birds all hanging out together. These were all taken on Seabrook Island, but you can see this spectacle on a lot of other beaches in the state. And I should emphasize, I'm a photographer myself, but for any photographers that go out to try and get photos, it is so important to keep your distance. And if you make the birds alarmed by you, if you notice that you're altering their behavior at all, then you're too close. And it's okay to back away and keep your distance instead of trying to get the perfect shot, right? But beachgoers, photographers, birders, anybody that applies to, because their numbers, you know, they need our help as much as we can give it. And then there are a couple banded birds here too, and that's kind of a cool thing that research ongoing in the state that is a part of the geolocator and nanotag research that DNR does. I'd love to talk more about that. And like I said, I could talk an hour about these birds, but we'll move on. So least tern are a seabird that nest in the state, and they're one of my favorites because they are spunky, even though they're the smallest seabird in the state. they have all these goofy kind of fun behaviors that I'll talk through some of them here in a second. But we have, at least the last time a statewide study was done, we had 671 nesting pairs in the state. And the majority of them nest on pebble rooftops. And I'll talk about their fish exchange, gift giving, courting behavior in a second. But these least tern are funny this time of year because they're courting each other. The males will go off and find the shiniest little silverfish that it can find. It'll bring it back to the female, and the female are often just kind of hanging around on the beach while courting is going on. And the male will come over and kind of wave the shiny little silverfish in the female's face and try and get its attention. And maybe it's something about the quality of that male's feathers or the shininess of the fish or the size maybe. But that female will either choose to accept the gift or reject it. And unfortunately, in this case, the female rejected it and flew off. Sometimes the male will try and give that same fish to other females in the area, but if it is totally giving up, I've seen it just eat the fish and go try again with a new one. But sometimes they're successful. So this time, here's the male bringing the fish to the female, handing it off. Oh, the female's taking it. Successful. And I think that is such a fun picture that Ed Conrad here got on Seabrook Island. That male looks so proud of himself. But in the end, this is what we want to see, right? We want to see happy birds, chicks, eggs, chicks hatching, and then the chicks ultimately fledging. But I want to point out this top right picture because that's kind of an interesting behavior for chicks to be nuzzled underneath mom or dad's wings there. Normally when you see chicks underneath a parent, you think, oh, they're incubating, and that's true, but incubation isn't just to keep eggs warm. In fact, on the beach, it's to keep the chicks and the eggs cool. We know that when eggs get too cold, they slow down development, but if they get too hot, they will perish. And in the hot summer sun here in South Carolina, that happens in just a few minutes for eggs or chicks to fry in the sun. So that's why they're hanging out underneath mom or dad's wing there. Keep saying mom or dad because it's really hard to impossible to tell least tern male and female apart. So what you might see on the beach are maybe some courting displays if you're lucky enough to be on the beach right now, on a beach with least tern. And again, it's so important to keep our distance from these birds and let them do their thing, quite literally. If they're actually nesting and we get too close to that nest, this picture to the left, the photographer, he accidentally got too close and he quickly turned around and got away from the colony. But he said he turned his camera up real quick and got that shot as he was running away. But they will dive bomb you. And what is kind of fun is, well, I mean, it's fun, but it's fun behavior, but it's not so good to intentionally do this, right? If somebody like a person who is perceived as a predator gets too close to a nesting colony, they'll first send out a little scout to go check you out. They'll go out and back. And then after that, if you keep getting closer, they'll send out the attack team. They'll start to dive bomb you and they won't actually hit the target, but they'll threaten to make lots of noise. So it's pretty hard to miss. And at that point, if you're too close, or at that point you are too close, so you should turn around and go the other way. But I've also heard of these birds pooping on people if they get even closer, way too close to that nest. They really are not tolerant of people at all. So there are some really obvious signs with this species if a predator is too close. Different organizations in the state post these nesting bird signs that you see in the bottom right that delineate most nesting colonies in the state. Another bird that will let you know when you're too close is the Wilson's plover. So there are not too many nesting in South Carolina, but this is a pretty significant number for how many there are left in the Atlantic. So 375 nesting pairs in the state, last time a statewide census was done. They're usually just 3 eggs, and they do something called a broken wing display, which I'll talk about in more detail in a second. These guys are probably the most tolerant of people. For instance, we have seen them nesting on places like Seabrook Island in the past, and nest on most beaches up and down the coast. So disturbance can still make them abandon the nest. And so it's still important to keep our distance from these guys and gals. This one, you can tell the difference between male and female most times because the male has a darker black necklace and the female at the top right here has just a gray brown. So they also shade their eggs all summer long. That's their incubation. So first thing that they'll do when a predator gets too close is just stand up and try and make you think, oh, there's nothing here. And if that predator, whether it's a coyote, a raccoon, or a person, gets even closer, then they'll just run off. They'll run away from the nest. And they do that because they know their nests are hard to locate and that their nests and chicks are camouflaged. And so some really cool, cute pictures here of those chicks at the bottom of the screen. You can see that they're speckled, as the eggs are, just like the sand around them. So these birds know that they are well camouflaged. However, if that predator keeps getting closer, they'll do something called that broken wing display. It's kind of a funny cartoon, but I have a video coming up of what that looks like next. We commissioned these cartoons through an artist in Chicago that now lives in South Carolina to do those. So this is a piping plover. They do the same thing, the broken wing display. And I'm going to show you this video, but I got to say, it's a great example of the broken wing display, but it really, again, it kind of hurts my heart that somebody stayed around this long to get a video like this. But Wilson's plover do this also. They kind of flatten themselves up against the ground and flap their wings in kind of looking like they're hurt.
Taking a video? Mm-hmm.
Making those hurt sounding squeak noises. So whoever's taken that video is way too close to the nest. And that's that. They'll throw themselves in front of you or the predator to do that display. I mean, it's astonishing that they are so brave to throw themselves in front of a predator, but when that predator starts to decide to follow them and they're luring them away by doing that, and they're far enough away from the nest, what do you think the Wilson's plover actually does then? Well, it flies away because it's actually okay. And will go back and sit down on a nest when the predator is far enough away. So what you might see on the beach, if you're lucky enough and if you're vigilant enough and you haven't spooked them, remember if you spook them, then you probably won't see any of this. So they do defend their territories. They'll fight with other couples like the top right. They hang out in pairs. They hang out in pairs this time of year. And while one is sitting on the nest, the other one is probably out looking for food. And then they'll trade off kind of halfway through the day. And both tend to the chicks. And when those chicks hatch, like you can see in the bottom right, actually these photos are by Ed Conrad too. I should have noted that at the bottom. But those chicks need to be corralled by the parents almost 24/7. And they're going out to find their own food. And within just a couple of hours, the chicks are up and running after hatching. So it's a big job for those parents to keep those little baby birds corralled. If a predator gets too close to a chick, they'll just stop moving and hide, probably near some rack. So they know they're camouflaged as well. And that makes it, unfortunately, really easy for people to accidentally step on them or for cars, if they're allowed on the beach, to roll over the birds. So they have a lot going against them, but they are just the cutest little baby birds. And here's this, this term that I kind of described earlier, but the umbrella effect. If we do good for those 4 birds, then we do good for most other birds that use the beach, whether they're black skimmers, American oyster catchers, willet in the top right, sanderling, ruddy turnstone. It's all wimbrel. we're doing good for everybody else. So we're going to take another quick question break right now. Let me know if there are any questions in the chat before we move on.
Hey, Nolan, we've had a number of questions, and I've done my best to answer the ones I can in the chat box, but there's a few. One quick one, I discussed scopes with Anna, and she was asking about which ones to get. I kind of went over a few of them, but which one do you use, or is there one you really like?
So the two scopes that I've used are Vortex and Leopold, and I like them both a lot. There are only a few vendors locally that sell them. You probably have to get them online, but it's tough to pick one out before you've actually tried it. Leopold, I think is my favorite of the two. But I mean, the absolute cream of the crop is Swarovski, right? They're extremely expensive, and I've never had one, but the quality of the image is on point. Yeah, but there are a lot of good brands out there. I'm not really endorsing one over the other, but it all depends on what your budget is and kind of what your needs are. And then of course you got to get the tripod and the head for the tripod. I would say spend on the scope, and maybe don't spend as much on the tripod, but you want something stable enough that's going to hold up if it's windy out on the beach. Yeah, so and that's a good question. Yeah.
All right, so we have a few more. I'm going to try and kind of lump a few together. But someone was asking about the difference between red knots and sanderlings and dowitchers, because they all look pretty similar, or, you know, hang out in similar areas. And then when do the red knots arrive in South Carolina, which might help you differentiate some of those species too.
Yeah, so you said dowitcher. I'm going to write this down so that I can maybe show you some pictures at the end. So dowitcher, sanderling, and red knot.
Yes.
Well, I'll start with the red knot arrive usually beginning to mid-March, and they'll start to accumulate until April. And then in April, they're really here in big numbers. And by the end of April, most of them will start to move on, and they'll kind of trickle out of the state until May 15th. So March 15 to May 15 for red knot. For dowitcher and sanderling, they're here in that same time frame. And honestly, I think the best way I can describe them is just with pictures. But sanderling, the way, and actually there's a picture of it back here. Here's our sanderling. The thing that gives it away for me, especially if there are no other birds for like a size reference or anything, first thing I look at is the bill on beach birds, and I say, okay, this is a sandpiper, a species of sandpiper, because it has a longer bill. Plovers have shorter, stouter bills, like you can see on the Wilson's plover, but this is also a skinnier bill. But then with sanderling, a lot of them have this little black armpit, and that's a giveaway for me. If you get really good, I think it's sanderling that have a hind toe, but that's kind of like roll your eyes, right? Like who's going to be able to see the toes on a shorebird?
Especially because they run so fast.
Yeah.
Jason had a question about shorebirds when they defend their nest and attack somebody, or, you know, dive at them. He asked if they don't return to the nest after that, or will they continue to nest there, or will they relocate?
Okay, yeah, so if birds come out and like dive bomb and kind of attack, they can tolerate that only a certain number of times, and how many times, I'm not sure. But if it only happens a few times, they're likely to stay, because I mean, that's their natural reaction to a predator. And if that predator goes away, then they'll go back and nest. So if it happens too often though, they will abandon the nest and try to have another brood somewhere else. At that point, they've just been disturbed too much, and the birds kind of decide, okay, time for me to move on. This is not safe for us. I hope that answers.
All right. Yeah, I think that does. We have one more question from Ron. He asked about should they mark nests to keep unintentional stepping, keep from people stepping on the nests on accident, or should they not mark them, or is there a way to go about doing that to have people be alert but not attract predators maybe?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and it's something that beach managers think about too. Should you mark a nest? That's where we call it symbolic fencing or the signage comes in. I'm gonna go back to a couple slides back. That bottom right photo, you can see there's a line of signs. So all of the nesting sites that the state and Audubon know of will already be posted. However, if you find a nest outside of that zone, the best thing you can do is let your beach manager know. I would recommend not marking it yourself. That does a few things that unintentionally, and I know this comes from the best intentions, but accidentally you'll disturb the bird yourself by marking the nest. And also keep in mind that they are cryptic nesters. So by marking it with something really close to the nest, you are then calling them out, right? You're saying to any other predators, and some are very clever, that there is something here, you should check it out. So I'd recommend just not marking nests and letting your beach manager know. Sometimes those signage can be extended, or we can get volunteers out there to talk about the nest without actually marking it. That's a good question.
All right, I think that's the real pressing questions for the moment. I'll keep track of the other ones though.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. All right, so we shall move on. I have one other video that I wanted to share that I just think is so cool. In the past presentations, I've focused on American oyster catchers, but we didn't this time, so I wanted to show one video. So this time of year, and probably most of it's in the summer, but in the beginning of the nesting season, when we really get going, they'll kind of draw their territory lines with other couples or other couples. And this video shows that really nicely. Now, this is not my video. I found this on YouTube. But you can see they do this posturing with their heads up and down and kind of puff their chest out a little bit. And then if a pair steps over that line a little too far, then they will get aggressive and go after it. But it's just so fun to see those.
Hey, Nolan. No one could hear you over the those noisy oyster catchers. Could you repeat a little bit of what you were saying during that video?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for letting me know. Those noisy oyster catchers, that's what they sound like. But I was just saying that they pair up in the beginning of the summer and in early spring, or mid-spring, I mean, and will kind of line or delineate their territories together. They do this kind of cool posturing where they puff their chest out and buck their heads up and down. And then if the opposite pair gets too close or steps over the line, then they'll jump out and kind of attack them or chase them off. It's just it's a fun thing to see this time. Sorry about that. So we'll go on, and we're about to take a quick break. But this is we're going to go back to the Wilson's plover real quick. And there's something going on here. There's 5 legs on this Wilson's plover. So what's happening? Give you a second to think about it, but those are chicks sitting underneath mom or dad's wing there. So like I said, with the least turn, these birds are all summer long, they have to get shade. They have to stay cool. Sometimes parents will even fly down to the water and dribble it onto the chicks and the eggs to keep them cool. But this is the reason why keeping away from nests and encouraging other beachgoers to do the same is so important, because if they cannot get the shade that they need, then they can perish, unfortunately. And this is the last cartoon I'll show during the presentation, but it's one that is really, it really tells the story well of what these birds go through. Monday and Tuesday, these birds are building the nest. Wednesday, they're getting excited to lay, and these birds will lay 1 egg a day until they get 3 in the nest, usually. 3 eggs on Friday, they're both so excited. And then here come the weekend crowds, with dogs and, people just having a good time like we all have done. Frisbees getting thrown and dogs chasing by, and unfortunately the parents have to abandon if there is that much disturbance. And then even on Monday, if there are no people on the beach anymore, those birds have then learned that this beach is unsafe and they'll abandon. So this is the problem that Shorebird Stewards addresses. And we'll talk about solutions to this in the next half of the presentation. But for now, we're gonna take a quick break. And since this is a webinar, we'll just do it for a few minutes. So let's say 3:40, and I'll answer questions in the meantime. So if there are any good questions or you want to ask anything in the chat, now is a good time to do it, but also a good time to go run, grab a bite to eat or whatever you need to do. Something that we've been thinking about a lot is how COVID-19 has impacted the birds. And we think, and we're pretty sure that because people aren't allowed on the beaches now due to COVID-19, a lot of these birds have kind of had a break from the normal annual crowds, especially over spring break and as we get into summer and school's getting out. So that's kind of been maybe a silver lining for these birds. However, I also am still worried about people that are lucky enough to have access to beaches, that maybe live on the beach. If they don't know about it and have the beach all to themselves, what kind of, maybe there are still people probably running through flocks of migratory red knot or getting too close to nesting areas. So I have been nervous about it, but I think overall it's probably going to be a pretty good year, at least until beaches open back up. So I'm going to check some of the questions in the chat here. So distinction between seabirds and shorebirds. So some examples of those are seabirds would include like brown pelicans, black skimmers, tern species, or laughing gulls are considered seabirds that are kind of hanging out more over the ocean and getting their food from the sea, right? But then shorebirds are mostly just plovers and sandpipers, and plovers would include anything with the name plover in it: Wilson's plover, piping plover, semi-palmated plover, black-bellied plover. And our sandpipers include like sanderling, red knot are a sandpiper, and curlews, dowitchers, they're all considered sandpipers. Yeah, but that's a good question. And we are going to review or record this presentation, and well, we are recording it right now, and we will edit it a little bit and probably upload it to our website and make it available to view later. Yeah. And part of what I'll talk about in the second half is how are some additional resources that we can send you to keep learning. We'll give it another minute here and then get back to it. All right. Jen, you think we're ready to get started again?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Cool. Let's continue. I got to point out these Gen 2 penguins are not native to South Carolina. I just thought this was a cool picture. All right, so into the human side of this shorebird seabird topic. And these slides, again, we've presented this in different ways, but I think Melissa Chaplin did such a good job instilling this or distilling this into a few slides here. So shorebirds and seabirds suffer from something called coastal squeeze. If you have never heard of this term, it's where coastal development is pushing their habitat seaward and sea level rise is pushing their habitat landward. So that habitat that they have available to them gets smaller and smaller every year. And so if you build it, they will come, right? A lot of people love going to the beach. I'm one of them. And coastal and beachfront developments bring them there. But they will go. Unfortunately, they just don't go hand in hand. Coastal development and wildlife just don't often work well together. It displaces these beach-dependent species from sea turtles to horseshoe crabs to shorebirds. And they're pushed out or become more vulnerable because they have to share the beach with people. And out of everything that they have to face, all of these things on the screen are struggles or threats that they face. The one that rings the loudest and is the worst issue is recreational disturbance. There was actually a study done through the Atlantic Flyway Shorebird Initiative funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They called it the Atlantic Flyway Disturbance Project. So as part of this project, they conducted an extensive literature review on the current published science about shorebirds. And they found 632 citations referencing disturbance. An overwhelming number that just shows that this is an issue. And so another segment of this project that was led by the same people, and they were at the Virginia Tech Shorebird program, people like Kelsey Hunt, Carolyn Comer, Dan Catlin, really great researchers. I'm sorry if I'm missing a few, but they had these two really interesting findings from a lot of this work, from a lot of their work. And it's now well established that recreational disturbance is a serious concern along the Atlantic coast flyway. Results indicate the shorebirds were impacted by human recreational disturbance throughout their annual life cycles. And across all species included in this assessment, human disturbance negatively affects shorebirds. So for a bird, this is kind of what it looks like. You can see this little huddle of plovers, and they have people walking dogs, people biking by, people running, dogs off leash running by. or even just your everyday beach walker enjoying the beach. And most folks out on the beach, I think, still are just not aware that there are birds that really need to rest and refuel. And they might run through and flush the birds or disturb a nesting area. And these birds already have so many natural threats to deal with. This is a storm surge from a photo that was taken by an Audubon, Florida staff member in St. Johns County in 2013. But storms really wreck shorebird sites and offshore islands where these birds nest. Just a couple years ago, after it wasn't even a hurricane, it was a large storm paired with a high tide. We saw eggs washing up on Sullivan's Island and Isle of Palms because they had overwashed, or the tide had overwashed a nearby island where these birds were nesting. These birds know that they can't nest at low tide because the tide's going to come up, so it has to be behind the high tide line. But if a storm comes by, this just kind of illustrates what happens. They are so vulnerable to these natural events. And then, of course, there are predators to throw on top of that. Everything from winged to four-legged to crustaceans want to eat these guys. I've seen bald eagles coming down and munching on royal tern eggs. And then throw on top of all of that human threats, and this is all part of human disturbance. Luckily, at the top right, we don't have too much car traffic on the beach unless it's a security vehicle. And DNR and Audubon will work with municipalities to make sure that they are educated about shorebirds. Kite boarders, just people flying kites can be an issue. If you have ever been to, I think Walmart sells like red-shouldered hawk kites. What do you think that looks like to a shorebird, right? Looks like a red-shouldered hawk trying to eat some eggs. People putting their chairs up way too close to the beach, and of course, people boating up to Party Beach, right, which exists all up and down the coast. And again, this is not to blame these folks. It's just so difficult to find spots still where there are, where you can dock your boat or you can go and play on the beach that you won't be disturbing shorebirds. So education really is key here. And of course, dogs, right? Dogs, I have one, I love walking her around, and we go to the beach sometimes too, but we make sure to keep her on the leash, especially when we're near a shorebird area. This picture on the bottom left, I actually took that on a Saturday on Dewey's Island, South Carolina, one of the first spots where we had shorebird stewards active. So I was there on a Thursday, the week before, and we saw 4 pairs of Wilson's plover, all scouting out nesting territory, starting to do their courting behavior and being territorial with other pairs. Really cool to see. And we came back on Saturday, I came back with a volunteer. We talked to every single one of these boaters that came up. It was over 100 people. We felt really good about it. We had reached a lot of folks that day. And then I actually came back the following Monday, and just to check out if any Wilson's plovers had survived. They had all moved on. They all abandoned the site because there were just way too many people out there. So what does a nest look like? You can put your answer in the chat here, but I want y'all to think about, or actually guess in the chat, how many nests are here in this picture. I'll give you a second to think about it. And I'll give you a hint. They're all in between those 6 posts, and it's a least turn colony. So aim high. So there were 50 nests in this picture, 50. And if just sitting there or with this picture, you would not be able to tell that there are 50 nests in that picture, right? But they're there. This was a site in Florida. Some of these slides were adapted from the Audubon, Florida Shorebird Steward program a few years ago. So on this beach, there's kind of a sad story that comes along with this. A beachgoer this beach allowed dogs on it, but they had to be on a leash, and beachgoer maybe accidentally or maybe on purpose let the dogs off the leash, and they were bird dogs. They ran right through the colony. They were ripped through that site, and unfortunately, took the owner probably about a minute to get the dogs back under his control and back on the leash, and they walked away. But the damage was done in just a minute. That colony went from 50 down to 15 nests just in that minute that the dogs ran through. And would like to point out too that the dogs probably didn't even have to run through that. They probably could have been just walking near the colony. Those birds would have seen the dogs and recognized them as a predator, and also gotten up off the nest. So we hear a lot of people say, my dog wouldn't hurt a fly, right? And I'm sure you're right, but it's just the presence of a dog being in a zone like this that can cause so much damage. So the point of all this is to say that flushing birds off nests does cause nest failure, right? No matter the species. And flushing them off the shore causes energy loss for migrations, whether it's red knot or other species that migrate through South Carolina. So we have another break for questions here.
Okay, so we've had a few questions about, someone mentioned the pictures of all the boats on the beach at Dewey's, and they said it was against the governor's guidelines. Was that a recent picture, or was that from another season?
Yeah, that's a good point. So that picture was taken in like 2016 or 17, so that was not from this year.
Ah, that makes sense. All right, and then someone was asking about how often birds will make a second nest if they've been disturbed within the same season.
So is the question, do they make a second nest?
Yeah, so do the birds, if they have a nest failure, will they move to another location and lay more eggs?
Gotcha. So yeah, they often will, but there's only so much energy that they have to produce eggs every year. So they'll do it, they'll make a second nest, and if they have enough energy, they'll make a third nest, but often we don't see more than 3. American oyster catchers and Wilson's plovers, or whatever the species, 3 is kind of the cap, and the second and third brood usually has fewer eggs in it too, but they will relay. Yeah. Something that I hear a lot is, oh, the birds they'll just move on, right? They can fly. But think about all the 35 barrier islands that we have in the state. There are only a handful, and even on those handful that are suitable, only a very small sliver, probably in the inlet, that is safe and suitable for these birds to nest. So they can fly away, but there's nowhere else for them to go.
All right, I think that's all the questions we have for the moment.
Cool. Great questions. Definitely keep them coming, and thank you, Jen. All right, so our focus as Shorebird stewards is human disturbance. Whether that's foot traffic, clearly this kid's never seen the birds, and dogs off leash. So we've already talked about how dogs can be really dangerous for birds. Again, I love dogs. We partnered with the Charleston Animal Society on an educational campaign a couple years back. But really, they can be so dangerous for birds, and there are places that they should not be on the beach. And so I want you to think about whatever your favorite beach is, whether it's Folly or somewhere on Hilton Head or further north in South Carolina. Think about, what are the issues on your beach? What can you talk about to people? Is it kites? Are they people? Are there boats? Is it litter? Litter can be an issue and attract raccoons and other predators to nesting sites. Think about that. So stewards can be anybody, right? This is a picture of our good friend Judith Kramer. She was one of the first volunteers to sign up for a shift. We have much better looking signs now. This was our first year. I just drew that on there with a Sharpie, asked me about the birds. And Judith said I could use this photo in slides, but I have to give the disclaimer that this was the only time she was ever sitting down. But I use this photo as an example of, you can be somebody who lets people come to you, and then you can educate them, and that's totally fine. You can hang out, sit down, have a relaxing day at the beach, and when people come to ask you questions, let them know about the birds. Or you can walk around and point birds out to people and kind of be more active and reaching out to people. It's okay to walk up to people as long as you begin with a friendly greeting. And of course, well, just a few more pictures of what stewardship looks like. And I'll move this to earlier in the presentation. I wanted to just get through this real quick before we get into how to be a steward and how to educate people on the beach, but it's really simple to sign up. Once beaches are open again and once it's safe to go out, we'll be sending out sign-up pages for y'all to use. And this is just an example of one. So you'll click on the link for Folly Beach. It'll say 2020 Stewards, Folly Lighthouse Inlet, or Folly North Beach, the same thing. And it'll have a little description about where the supplies are kept. And those supplies include things like a beach cart, an umbrella, laminated sheets, like cheat sheets with fast facts and pictures on them. And of course your steward vest, which kind of would tell people, hey, I'm a volunteer and I'm out here officially. And then you scroll down a little bit, you'll come across the shifts to sign up, and they're usually 2 a day on Saturdays and Sundays, depending on the beach. And sign up for the time slots you want and click submit and sign up, and you'll be taken to this page. And if you want to put a comment, you can. We ask that you give us your cell phone number just in case we have to reach you. If there's a big storm coming in, we usually like to make sure that you are not going out or that you're staying safe. It's just a good practice, and we don't share your phone number with anybody, don't worry. If you do put a comment here though, then it'll show up on the sign up page for everybody to see. And you, for example, Jeff Muse here, he was new to the program and new at Charleston County Park System. He asked me if he could go out with somebody that was more experienced on his first time. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Carl Cole is one of those guys that's been doing this for years now. He is a pro Shorebird steward. And so I told him, sign up with Carl. So he put this little note in there that says, I need to learn the ropes about shorebird protection. Nolan suggested I join Carl for the shift. Thanks. So now Carl knows that Jeff is coming along with him. I've also seen people write notes like, hey, it's just me, so please join me. We like to have people signing up in pairs. And then you're all good to go after you sign up. And then you'll collect the beach cart and umbrella and whatever else you need. Bring a chair if you want to sit down. Be out on the beach. So this may be too soon of a stop for questions, but I wanted to make sure I stopped before we get into the stewarding do's and don'ts. So are there any that I can answer right now, Jen?
Yes, there were a couple that came in. One person said, are there any other stewarding programs outside of South Carolina or other Atlantic states or the Pacific Coast? So if you have a random list of all the stewarding sites off the top of your head.
Yeah, well, and a lot of the other states we have learned from. So in the Atlantic Coast, I know the closest to us, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, all have stewardship programs, and they're all really robust, very similar to ours. And on the Pacific Coast, yes, in fact, they do have stewardship programs out there too. Anywhere that birds nest in the U.S., it's likely that there is a stewardship program. So I'd recommend getting onto audubon.org and find, or whatever state you're in. For South Carolina, it's sc.audubon.org, and it's the same thing for any other state. Just look online for those stewardship opportunities and find the equivalent Nolan in the other state. There's a lot of cool people that work on these projects. And even in the Great Lakes, if you're there, there are also stewards there.
Perfect. Anna wants to know why only weekend steward opportunities?
Good question. So it's not only weekends, although that is usually when we focus our efforts. There are some sites that have people go out on like Thursdays. I'll say that if you want to volunteer on a day that's not listed, we can make that work. Just let me know, and I'll put in a shift during the day that you might want to go out. Just communicate with me and we can make it happen. We focus on weekends though, because that's when weekend crowds are at their largest. That's when we can do the most good for the shorebirds and reach the most people.
All right. I have a question from Darcy. How does beach renourishment affect shorebirds and seabirds?
Great question, Darcy. So beach renourishment, if anybody is unfamiliar, is basically taking sand from somewhere else and spreading it out onto a beach or to create an island. So beach renourishment can negatively impact shorebirds and seabirds by covering up the food that is available. A lot of that food, like we talked about early on in the presentation, are like little worms and shrimp that live underneath the sand that the birds are going after. So if we cover that up, then that changes the whole environment. Those bugs underneath can die or they can't get to the surface. That's why it's so important that the Army Corps of Engineers does a grain size study and measures to see if this sand that they're taking from somewhere else matches the sand that they're putting it in, because that can help minimize the negative effects of the beach renourishment.
Excellent. And one last question before we move on. Cindy wants to know if there's a program on Sullivan's Island.
So there is not a formal program on Sullivan's Island, although we have started to put nesting signs out for the Wilson's plover that has decided to come back and nest in a few years in a row. But it's something that we have talked about every year. So it will just take enough interest from community members, and then we'll work with the town administrator to figure out a program. But there is no program on Sullivan's Island yet, but I think there's a potential for one.
Perfect. All right, so I think we can move ahead, and I'll keep track of any other questions that come in.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Great questions, everybody. So some stewarding do's and don'ts, and I'll go through these one by one. I've distilled these down to just a few slides. But this is kind of where it gets interesting in the human perspective kind of things, because our goal really is to educate and inspire, right? We're not out there to enforce the rules. We are guiding views of these beach birds and pointing them out to people, helping them realize that these birds are important and they're here and they need your help. Giving people reasons to care about beach birds can be a difficult thing to do, but it gets pretty easy when you bring it to a personal place. So something that I often like to do is just share my own passion for the birds and say, you know, seeing my first Wilson's plover chick ever was one of the best moments of my life, right? You could say something like that. And if these chicks hatch, then you know that we know this is a healthy beach, right? So pulling them in with little nuggets from your own experience and your own stories. There's this idea of well, actually, I think I'll talk about this later. It's a spark bird, but I'll hold off on that. Be a good neighbor. So often the people that you're talking to on the beach are your neighbors, whether they're from one island over or maybe they're from the same community as you. They are your neighbors. So talk to them as such, right? This shouldn't be just a I'm going to talk at you kind of thing, but have a natural flowing conversation with them, and remember that you're probably going to have to see them mowing their lawn a week down the road, maybe. A steward should be able to tolerate beach conditions, and that means sometimes a lot of wind. It sometimes means a lot of heat, and we'll talk about how to be prepared for that, but it's something that you should know up front. Having a friendly and positive attitude is pretty important as a steward. If we communicate with a positive tone to people, then they will then reflect that energy, that positive attitude onto the birds. On the other hand, if we approach it with a negative attitude, then they're going to think about that when they think about the birds. Man, that bird guy was really rude. That does not give them very many reasons to care about the birds. But you know, if you're friendly and positive, then it'll always be a good outcome. Talk to beachgoers informally, like I mentioned before, and little things like looking for eye contact and signs of curiosity or signs of uncomfortableness. You know, maybe you're standing too close to the person and you want to get 6 feet away and keep talking, or maybe they are leaning in and really interested, and then keep the information coming, right? But make it a conversation. Ask them about their day and all that good stuff. Keep an eye on the flock. Be aware of where the birds are. And this is so important near these nesting sites. Because if we flush the birds off their nest or out of their migratory flock, then we've accidentally been the thing harming the birds, right? And that includes, if you see a nest, please don't go and try and find the nest. You have this education now, so let's use it for good, right? And educate others from a distance. And on that point, show people the birds using your scope and binoculars. Some sites have scopes available if you don't already have one. But if you have binoculars, that's a great thing to bring to the beach and share with other people. Give people a chance to experience this, right? This should be a conversation. And if you ask folks to share the responsibility, you know, we're all in this together, but we all have a personal responsibility to be good stewards of the beach. And remember that you're representing a lot of organizations. Maybe it's just Audubon, maybe it's Audubon in a county park, or Audubon in a state park, or Audubon and your community bird club, right? We have all these partners that you are representing out there. And then our stewarding don'ts, and we'll do this real quick and then we'll go back to the positive stuff. But don't be mean. Again, if we're mean to people, then our education is going to go right in one ear and out the other. Don't enforce the rules. Our job is not to be police officers. We're not enforcement. We are educators, right? And we want to inspire people, not wag our fingers at them. Again, don't disturb birds for any reason. And you also don't have to be an expert. There's a lot of information to learn about shorebirds and seabirds, but anybody can learn enough to contribute. You just have to have a kind-hearted approach to it, and maybe have one fun fact about birds that you want to share. And something that I hate talking about, but we have to talk about it, and I'll touch on it just very briefly, is that people sometimes will refuse to cooperate, and generally this is like 2% of the population. If somebody gets aggressive or threatening or is giving you body language that they just don't want to listen to you, then it's okay. Let them go, back off immediately, and if you feel unsafe, call island security, whoever that is. Because your safety is paramount. If somebody gets aggressive or threatening, please back off first. We want to have fun with the program and educate people, and often it is such a rewarding experience. I get a lot of notes after people volunteer during a shift, just saying that I had so many great conversations with the people I met on the beach, and that really is 98% of the time. If you see somebody actively throwing eggs around or something just absolutely awful like that, please report the violation, or at least write it down and report it when you feel safe to do so. So back to our pro tips, and this is a pro tip. This is from Harbor Island. They have an awesome stewardship program there. I can't speak highly of it enough, but she's getting down to pet that dog. And you might think, oh man, dogs aren't supposed to be here. Dogs are bad for shorebirds. So, you know, you might be feeling a little anger, and that's natural, but I love this picture because she is getting down on that dog's level, showing that, hey, I'm your neighbor. I'm a friend and want to hear to talk about the birds. And even though dogs may not be allowed in that area, which I think they are on leash in this picture, but she's getting down to pet the dog. Do that if you feel comfortable with it. That's a good way to start a conversation. So our pro tips, start with 2 positives. And by 2 positives, I mean 2 positive sentences. I do this still today. After 5 years of doing this, every time I go up to talk to somebody, I'm thinking in my head on my walk there, okay, what can I say that is positive, and we'll start off the conversation in a good place. So it can be something as simple as, hey, I love your hat. It's such a beautiful day out here today. Or, oh, you have a beautiful dog. Can I pet it? If you start the conversation that way, they'll open up and maybe want to have a conversation with you. Whereas on the other hand, if you start with 2 negatives or a negative sentence like, hey, get out of here, get your dang dog out, there's a nesting area here. That'll immediately put a wall up in front of folks' faces, or mentally, right? So start with 2 positives. The next one is listen. This is something that we can forget to do sometimes. Ask questions and listen to them, listen to their questions, and make it a conversation, right? So this social diffusion or social norm theory This is interesting, I think, because, and I was first learned the depth of this after reading a study about hotels. So as part of the hotel policy, I'm sure everybody's been to a hotel probably before. In the bathrooms, you'll sometimes see a little plaque that says like, please try to get you to recycle your towel or reuse your towel instead of just throwing it on the ground. And they tried this study with signs that first said, most people that visit that stayed in this room don't reuse their towels. So be the difference. And they saw that there was no change in people reusing their towels. Everybody still threw it on the ground after one use. But then they tried a little different wording on those plaques. And they instead said 75% of the people that stayed in this room before you decided to reuse their towel. And that actually made a difference. People were reusing the towels, and it was just from a simple tweak. So basically, if people think that most people that come to the beach actually do walk around the flock, most people that come out here are aware of the birds, then that will make people want to be part of the norm and be part of that social circle, right? So you could try saying something like, most people that come to this part of the beach will try to walk around the flock. It's a really healthy beach for the birds, right? Something you could try. Sharing your sincere enjoyment of the birds goes a long way. I think so this is where I'll talk about spark birds. Spark bird is that species that you maybe first noticed in your neighborhood or backyard or wherever you were that first got you interested in looking out for birds. For me, it was a red-headed woodpecker on my college campus behind the cafeteria. Such a striking, beautiful bird in the middle of what I thought was kind of desolate. Just grabbed me. So if you share those sort of stories with other people and you're sincere about it, then that will come off in a really nice way and help educate people. These birds are protected under state and federal laws, so that's good to know. Analogies are also really great to use on people. They help illustrate issues that are maybe otherwise complex. So a good analogy that I always use, you heard me use in the beginning of the presentation, is that when these birds are here, it's like they're at a food court. And they just want to eat. They're desperate to eat. In fact, they've flown thousands of miles to get to this food court. But us running through the flock is like somebody pulling a fire alarm on them. And think about if you were in that circumstance, had to go outside, wait 30 minutes, come back to the food. Oh, thank goodness it's still there. You start eating. Somebody pulls the fire alarm again. If that happens over and over and over, you're not going to be too happy. So Southern Hospitality, Ranger Mike Walker at Huntington Beach State Park first showed me this one. Let's show these birds a little Southern hospitality. I think it's kind of a fun analogy. And in the end, really, cooperation is the only long-term solution, not compliance. Cooperation is the positive outcome that comes from education and comes from the Shorebird Steward program. So just a few more slides left, and I'll take more questions and finish it up. But when you go out to Steward, please be prepared. Always bring about twice the amount of water I think I'll need. I bring a snack because I always get hungry during the 2 or 3 hour shifts. Wide-brimmed hats are awesome. A few people decided to just ditch the umbrella, leave it in the storage, and just use their wide-brim hat. Sunblock, sunglasses, bring your cell phone in case you need to make a call or take pictures. That helps report things back to me and to other beach managers. And then your volunteer t-shirt. This year we are doing a t-shirt order form, and your vest if you want to use the vest. Binoculars and spotting scope, of course, as well. On your cheat sheets that are stored with all of the equipment in each site, and every site's different. Some are in like a box by the beach. Some are brought to you by somebody who lives on the island. But this is not my actual cell phone number since this is a public event. I didn't want to put it out there. But my cell phone number are on those cheat sheets. SCDNR Operation Game Thief is out there in case you do have an issue with people disturbing eggs or directly harming birds. Of course, 911 is for emergencies. And then our site leader volunteers, number will be there, and a local beach manager will be there, like local law enforcement, if you need it. So these are all key contacts to either save in your phone or just reference on that cheat sheet when you get to the beach. Almost done here. When we need stewards are mainly on weekends and holidays like Memorial Day and the 4th of July. Luckily, the 4th of July is on the weekend this year. Normally they're 2-hour shifts, but some are 3. I think there are some that are 4. Please sign up for shifts. When we reopen things, we'll try and keep in contact with you via email and Facebook. There is a Facebook group specifically for Shorebird stewards. Please go out and find it and join. Stewards will communicate with each other and talk about what kind of nests are out there. And we need stewards really throughout the summer until July or August. So fingers crossed that we can have a solid program this year. But now that you've taken this training, you really are, you are registered or qualified to be a Shorebird steward. So welcome to the flock. Give yourself a clap or a pat on the back because you made it through a whole almost 2-hour virtual presentation, and I'm so thankful that you stayed through the whole thing.